A billionaire CEO goes on a solo vacation in the Caribbean to escape his marriage, but is left in complete shock when he encounters two twin boys at the beach who look exactly like him as a child. Before we begin this story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The Caribbean sun beat down in golden waves, shimmering over the turquoise sea as Rowan Callahan stepped off his private yacht onto the dock. The warm breeze carried the scent of salt and sunscreen, mixing with the distant hum of laughter and steel drums playing from a beachfront bar. It was paradise, at least that's what he told himself. He should have felt lighter here, away from the suffocating tension of his Manhattan penthouse, away from Isla's cool, distant stares across the dinner table, away from the cold, sterile silence that had become their marriage. They hadn't fought in months. There was nothing left to fight about. Just two people sharing space, bound by a legal contract neither of them had the energy to break. This trip was supposed to help clear his head, to give him a moment of clarity before he faced the inevitable. Divorce had been hanging in the air for a long time now, an unspoken agreement neither of them wanted to be the first to acknowledge. Maybe when he got back, he'd finally say the words. But for now, there was sand beneath his feet, an expensive villa waiting for him, and the illusion of escape. Rowan adjusted his sunglasses and made his way down the dock toward the resort's private beach, tugging his linen shirt open at the collar. He just wanted a drink, a lounge chair, and an afternoon without thinking. Maybe if he was lucky, he could find a distraction for a few hours, something to take his mind off everything waiting for him back home. The resort was alive with the hum of vacationers, families playing in the waves, couples sipping cocktails under umbrellas, kids chasing each other along the shore. He exhaled, his shoulders rolling back as he settled into the role of a man with nothing to worry about. Then he saw them. Two boys, no older than 6, sprinting across the sand, kicking up small clouds of white powder beneath their bare feet. They were identical, same dark hair, same bright, mischievous eyes, same lopsided smirks that looked so familiar and made his stomach twist. He froze. His drink order, the sun, the sound of the ocean, everything else disappeared. Because those weren't just any kids. They had his face. Rowan ripped off his sunglasses, his heartbeat slamming against his ribs as he tracked their movements. One of them had climbed onto a rock, arms spread wide like he was about to take flight, while the other stood below, yelling something Rowan couldn't hear over the rush of blood in his ears. They were grinning, completely oblivious to the fact that they had just turned his entire world upside down. His pulse pounded as 1,000 thoughts raced through his mind. It wasn't possible. He didn't have kids. He'd made sure of that. Unless his breath caught in his throat. No. It couldn't be. But then he saw her. She stepped onto the sand, pulling off a pair of oversized sunglasses and shaking out long waves of sun-kissed brown hair. She was laughing at something one of the boys had said, her voice soft, easy, like she belonged here, like she had built a life in this place. His chest tightened. Sienna. It felt like a punch to the gut. For a second, he thought he was hallucinating. Maybe the sun had finally fried his brain. But she was real. She was right there, helping one of the boys wipe sand off his legs, tucking a damp curl behind his ear. And Rowan knew, deep in his bones, those were her children. His children. The past slammed into him so hard he nearly staggered. Sienna Carter. The woman he had walked away from 6 years ago. The woman he had handed a check to in a sterile Manhattan hotel room, convincing himself it was the best thing for both of them. The woman he had never allowed himself to think about again. Rowan swallowed hard, his body locked in place. She looked different, more relaxed, more at ease. There were faint laugh lines around her eyes, a softness in the way she carried herself that hadn't been there before. But there was no mistaking her. His fingers curled into his palms as a sickening realization settled in. She hadn't gone through with it. He had given her the money, assumed she had done what they had agreed on, and never looked back. He had erased the idea of a future where he was a father before it had a chance to take root. And yet here they were. He forced himself to breathe, to think, to piece together the impossibility of what he was seeing. The boys, his sons, because there was no way they weren't his, were alive, real, running through the surf without a care in the world. And he had never known. His stomach twisted. She had never told him. Anger flared beneath the shock, a sharp, bitter burn. She had made that choice. She had decided to raise them without him, never giving him a say. And now, 6 years later, he was supposed to do what? Pretend he didn't see them? Pretend this wasn't happening? He dragged a hand over his face, trying to steady himself, but nothing about this moment felt steady. One of the boys, Leo, maybe, spotted him first. He paused mid-sprint, tilting his head in curiosity, and for a terrifying second, Rowan swore the kid recognized him. But before he could say anything, the other twin tackled him into the sand, dissolving the moment into giggles and playful shrieks. Rowan let out a shaky breath. He needed to talk to her. Sienna hadn't noticed him yet. She was sitting on the beach now, watching the boys with a fond, tired smile, completely unaware that the past had just come crashing back into her quiet little life. Rowan forced himself to move, to cross the sand in slow, measured steps. His heart pounded as he stopped a few feet away, standing just outside her line of sight. Then, voice rough, he said the only thing he could. "Sienna." She stiffened instantly. For a long, heavy moment she didn't turn around. He saw the way her shoulders tensed, the way her fingers curled slightly against the fabric of her sundress. She knew who it was before she even looked. And when she finally did, her expression was unreadable. Rowan. His name on her lips was like a ghost from another lifetime. She didn't look surprised to see him. If anything, there was something almost resigned in the way she met his gaze, like she had been waiting for this moment, dreading it. He glanced toward the boys, who were still lost in their own world, oblivious to the storm brewing just feet away. He swallowed hard, his throat tight. They're mine," she interrupted, her voice firm. A beat of silence passed between them. "Yeah," Rowan said quietly. "I can see that." The words were barely out of his mouth before she stood up, brushing sand off her legs with practiced ease. She didn't offer him a smile, didn't soften the way she used to. Instead, she looked him right in the eye and delivered the final blow. "You're 6 years too late, Rowan." And just like that, she turned and walked away. Rowan stood there, staring after her, his entire world tilting on its axis. 6 years? 6 years of living a life he hadn't even known existed. And now, whether he was ready for it or not, everything had changed. Rowan stood there, rooted in the sand, watching Sienna walk away as if he were nothing more than a distant memory. His mind reeled, struggling to grasp the reality that had just crashed into his carefully controlled life. The boys, his boys, chased each other down the shoreline, their laughter cutting through the thick, humid air. 6 years? He had spent 6 years believing he had no children, no family beyond the broken marriage he left simmering back in Manhattan. And now, here they were, flesh and blood, running barefoot in the sand like he had never existed. A rush of something foreign and unwelcome twisted in his gut. Regret. He had to talk to her. Without thinking, Rowan strode after Sienna, his pace quickening when she didn't turn back. He caught up with her just as she reached the steps leading up to the open-air restaurant perched above the beach. "Sienna," he said, his voice sharp with urgency. She stopped but didn't turn around. Instead, she let out a slow, measured breath, like she was preparing herself for the inevitable. Then, finally, she faced him. "What do you want, Rowan?" There was no warmth in her voice, no hint of the woman he had once known. She wasn't surprised to see him. No, this was something else. This was a woman who had made peace with the past, until it had just come walking up behind her. He took a moment to study her face, to memorize the changes. The Sienna he had known in New York had been sharp edges and ambition, with a fire in her that had once drawn him in. But the woman in front of him now, she was different. Sun-kissed skin, a quiet strength in her posture, a softness in her features that told him she had built something here. Something without him. Rowan cleared his throat, shoving his hands into his pockets. "So, turns out I'm a dad?" Sienna's jaw tightened. No, she said coolly. You're just the guy who paid me to be a single mom. The words hit like a gut punch, stealing the air from his lungs. He opened his mouth, then closed it. There was no accusation in her tone, no bitterness. Just a quiet, brutal honesty that left him standing there, completely unarmed. She wasn't wrong. He had given her that money 6 years ago and walked away, never once looking back to ask what had happened after. You didn't. He swallowed hard, trying to find his footing. Why didn't you tell me? Sienna exhaled, her gaze steady. You were clear about what you wanted, Rowan. I wasn't going to beg you to change your mind. A sharp, defensive retort burned at the tip of his tongue, but he held it back because, damn it, she was right. He had been the one who ended things. He had been the one who handed her that check, thinking money could make up for his inability to be what she needed. He had convinced himself he wasn't ready for fatherhood, that he had too much at stake, that he wouldn't be a good dad anyway. And now? Now he was standing in front of the proof that he had been catastrophically wrong. Rowan ran a hand through his hair, frustration clawing at him. You should have told me. Sienna crossed her arms, studying him like she was waiting for him to catch up. Why? The single word made him pause. She wasn't asking for an explanation, she was making a point. Why should she have told him? So he could do what exactly? Give her another check and walk away? Pretend to care until it got too real? Tell her, once again, that he wasn't ready? His stomach churned. I deserve to know, he said, but even to his own ears, the words felt weak. Sienna let out a quiet laugh, shaking her head. You deserve to know? She took a step closer, lowering her voice. Do you remember what you told me the night I found out I was pregnant? His jaw tensed. He remembered. Every word. This isn't a good idea, Sienna. I can't do this. We can't do this. You told me to take care of it, she said, her voice calm, but there was something sharp beneath the surface. And then you handed me a check, like I was a problem you could pay to disappear. Rowan's chest tightened. She didn't say it with anger, she didn't need to. The words themselves carried all the weight. And God, had he really been that much of an asshole? I thought, he exhaled, shaking his head. I don't know what I thought. Sienna lifted a brow. No, you didn't think at all. Rowan looked away, staring past her at the ocean. The waves rolled in, steady and sure, oblivious to the way his entire world had just tilted off its axis. His gaze drifted back to the beach, to the boys. Leo and Finn. They didn't know him. Didn't even know of him. And why would they? As far as they were concerned, they had one parent, the one who had chosen them. Guilt twisted in his gut, dark and unfamiliar. I need to talk to them, he said suddenly, the thought forming as the words left his mouth. Sienna's expression didn't change. No, you don't. His head snapped back to her. They're my sons. Her eyes darkened, but her voice remained steady. They're my sons. The air between them thickened. I have a right to know them, Rowan insisted, his voice quieter now, but no less firm. Sienna studied him for a long moment before she let out a soft, humorless chuckle. You don't get to do this, she said, shaking her head. You don't get to show up 6 years later and demand a place in their lives just because you feel guilty. Rowan clenched his jaw, but he didn't argue. Because she was right. Again. But it didn't change the fact that he was standing here, staring at a past he had abandoned, a life he had thrown away, and all he wanted was a way to undo it. He had no idea how to fix this. And then, like a bucket of ice water, another realization hit him. He had a wife back home. His stomach turned. Isla. Their marriage was already crumbling, already built on a foundation of silence and avoidance. But this was going to be the final blow. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to focus on the woman in front of him. On the two little boys playing in the surf, blissfully unaware that their entire world had just changed. Sienna. His voice was rough now, quiet. I don't know what you want me to do. Sienna sighed, her expression unreadable. I don't want you to do anything, Rowan. She turned, walking away again, this time toward the beach, toward the boys. You made your choice 6 years ago. She didn't look back. And for the first time in his life, Rowan Callahan felt like a man who had lost something he might never get back. Rowan sat on the balcony of his villa, a half-empty glass of whiskey resting on the table beside him. The sky had shifted to deep indigo, the last streaks of pink and orange swallowed by the horizon. Below, the waves rolled in gentle, rhythmic pulses, lapping at the shoreline as the resort lights flickered on. He could still hear them, Leo and Finn, laughing somewhere in the distance, their voices carrying over the wind. They were probably still playing, still full of energy, refusing to settle for the night. He rubbed a hand down his face, exhaustion pressing against his ribs. This was the part where he should call Isla. He pulled his phone from his pocket, staring at the screen as if it weighed more than it should. He had spent years perfecting the art of avoidance, of skirting around uncomfortable conversations, pretending things weren't falling apart when they so clearly were. But this was something else entirely. Telling Isla meant ripping apart the last thread that held their already fragile marriage together. He wasn't even sure why they had stayed married as long as they had. Maybe it was convenience. Maybe it was habit. Maybe it was the way neither of them wanted to be the one to pull the trigger. He scrolled to her name, his thumb hovering over the call button. Then, before he could think himself out of it, he hit dial. The line rang twice before she answered. Rowan. Her voice was smooth, crisp, like she was already bracing for something. Hey, he said, shifting in his chair. A pause. I wasn't expecting you to call. He almost laughed. He wasn't sure why, but the thought that she was surprised made something tighten in his chest. How had they gotten here? A place where even a simple phone call felt unexpected. I needed some air, he said instead, dodging the truth. Thought I'd check in. Another silence. Then, well, that's considerate of you. He could picture her perfectly, probably in their penthouse, dressed in something effortlessly elegant, a glass of wine in her hand, barely blinking at his call because she had already prepared herself for another empty conversation. How's the trip? She asked, and he could hear the detachment in her voice. He almost told her. Almost let it all spill out, the truth, the boys, Sienna, the years he had unknowingly lost. But when he opened his mouth, the words wouldn't come. Instead, he said, It's fine. Just different from what I expected. A soft hum. Sounds like a metaphor for our marriage. The comment caught him off guard, and for a split second, a flicker of something sharp passed between them. Honesty, maybe? He let out a slow breath, gripping his glass a little tighter. Isla. But she cut him off, her voice perfectly even. I should go. It's late. There was nothing cruel in her tone, nothing overtly cold. Just resignation. Right, he said, swallowing the lump in his throat. Good night, Isla. Good night, Rowan. The call ended. He let the phone drop onto the table, staring at it like it might give him the answers he didn't have. He should have told her. But the truth was, he didn't know what to say. That he had children? That the life he thought he had buried was still very much alive? That he was beginning to wonder if everything he had built, his wealth, his status, his carefully curated world, had all been for nothing? The laughter rose again, distant but clear, and his eyes found them. Leo and Finn were still on the beach, chasing after each other, their energy limitless even as the night stretched on. Rowan leaned forward, watching them, studying them. 6 years. He had missed everything. Finn tripped, falling into the sand, and Leo immediately dropped beside him, poking at his brother's shoulder before laughing like it was the funniest thing in the world. And something inside Rowan cracked. Because that could have been him. That could have been his childhood. He had grown up alone, raised by a father who was more concerned with profits than bedtime stories, a mother who had drowned herself in luxury to avoid acknowledging how cold their home had become. Rowan had sworn he would never be like his father, that he would never abandon something he had created. But he had. He had done the exact same thing. And now, watching these boys, seeing them in the flesh, seeing himself in them, he felt the weight of his own absence pressing down on his chest. He should walk away. He should go back to his life, to the world that made sense, to the marriage that was already cracking beneath its own weight. But he didn't want to. Not anymore. He told himself it was just curiosity, that he only wanted to know them because it was natural to feel something after a revelation like this. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. He was already falling for the life he had abandoned. And he had no idea what to do about it. Rowan didn't sleep much that night. After the call with Isla and the hours he had spent watching the twins from his balcony, he had come to one undeniable conclusion: he couldn't walk away. Not now. Not after seeing them,